You may not be failing your comeback. You may be fighting from the wrong stage. That sounds like a small distinction. It isn't. The moves that work in one stage of a comeback can quietly sabotage you in another. The caution that protected you 2 months ago may be the thing keeping you frozen today. The ambition that once pulled you forward may now be adding pressure to a foundation that isn't ready to carry it. But most people never stop to ask which stage they're actually in. They keep applying the same energy, the same urgency, and the same old plan, even after the ground underneath them has changed. That's why rebuilding can feel so confusing. You're doing things that look responsible. You're working harder, making plans, watching videos, telling people you're getting back on track. Yet something still doesn't hold. A comeback doesn't unfold as one continuous feeling. It moves through distinct phases, and each phase has its own objective, danger, and definition of progress. Trying to expand when you should be stabilizing feels like ambition. It may actually be exposure. Staying cautious when you're ready to move feels like patience. It may be avoidance wearing a respectable disguise. And trying to recreate your old life when the conditions have permanently changed can feel like determination, even while it sends you in the wrong direction. So this isn't another list telling you to work harder, think positively, or reinvent your entire life before Monday morning. It's about locating your position, because one of these 6 stages looks almost exactly like recovery. You're busy, you have plans, you may even feel motivated again. From the outside, everything appears to be moving. But if the foundation underneath that activity hasn't been rebuilt, the apparent recovery can send you backward. You'll know exactly which stage that is before we finish. More importantly, you'll understand what to do if you recognize yourself in it. More than 2,000 years ago, an ancient military text, traditionally attributed to Sun Tzu, presented a disciplined way of thinking about terrain, resources, timing, and position. The art of war was not written as modern self-help. It wasn't offering advice about layoffs, divorce, debt, burnout, careers, or personal confidence. Treating it as though it were would be historically careless. But some of its strategic principles can still provide a useful lens when they're clearly presented as modern interpretations rather than Sun Tzu's literal advice. One principle matters, especially here. Strategy depends on conditions. A plan cannot be judged separately from the position from which it is executed. A strong move from stable ground may become reckless when resources are low. A necessary retreat in one situation may become unnecessary hesitation in another. The question is not simply whether a strategy is good. The question is whether it fits your current position. Position before prescription. Before deciding what you should do next, you need an honest answer to a quieter question. What stage is this, really? For the purpose of this framework, the comeback general divides a comeback into 6 stages. This is not a clinical model. It isn't a universal law, and it doesn't claim that psychological recovery always follows 6 predictable steps. It's an educational map designed to help you identify your current strategic objective. Later stages aren't morally superior. Earlier stages don't mean you're weak. You may be further along professionally than you are emotionally. You may have rebuilt your finances while still struggling to trust yourself. You may be stable at work while your personal life remains disorienting. Different parts of your life can occupy different stages. You can also move backward. A new setback can change the terrain and require an earlier strategy again. That doesn't erase the ground you already recovered. It only means the conditions changed. The purpose of identifying your stage is not to label you. It's to stop you from demanding the wrong kind of progress from yourself. Most comebacks begin quietly. Before there is any real plan, they begin with impact. Maybe it was a phone call, an email you read twice because the first time didn't feel real, a conversation that ended a relationship, a job, a business, or a future you assumed would continue. Sometimes the event is public. Other times, nothing visible happens at all. You simply realize that the plan you were following no longer works and may not have worked for quite some time. Impact is the moment the ground shifts faster than your mind can redraw the map. Everything feels urgent, yet nothing feels clear. You replay the event. You examine conversations for clues you missed. You imagine what other people must be thinking. You move between panic and a strange emotional flatness. Part of you wants to fix everything immediately. Update the resume. Send the message. Make the announcement. Cancel every plan. Build a new identity by the end of the week. Action offers temporary relief because it creates the feeling that you're regaining control. But activity is not always control. Here is the diagnostic question for this stage. Are you responding to the conditions that exist now, or are you still reacting to the moment when everything changed? If every decision feels like an emergency, you may still be an impact. If you keep replaying the same conversation without discovering anything new, you may still be an impact. If you're alternating between frantic action and complete shutdown, you may still be an impact. And if your biggest desire is to prove, to yourself or to someone else, that you're already fine, you're probably closer to the event than you want to admit. The objective here isn't recovery yet. It's recognition. You need to understand what actually happened before shock begins making permanent decisions on your behalf. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means narrowing the assignment. In Lionel Giles' translation of The Art of War, the chapter on tactical dispositions begins with a precise line. The good fighters of old first put themselves beyond the possibility of defeat, and then waited for an opportunity of defeating the enemy. Applied carefully to modern recovery, the useful principle is not about defeating another person. It is about resisting the urge to pursue a dramatic victory before you have secured a clear enough position. The common danger in impact is making permanent moves to escape a temporary emotional state. You send the message because silence feels unbearable. You accept the first opportunity because uncertainty feels worse than a poor fit. You make a major purchase, move, commitment, or public promise because becoming the new you seems easier than sitting with the injured version of you. But speed cannot substitute for clarity. If this is your stage, separate what you know from what you fear. Take a blank page. On one side, write only the confirmed facts. What happened? What changed? What is definitely unavailable now? On the other side, write the predictions. What are you afraid this could mean? What do you imagine other people think? What future are you already treating as inevitable without having evidence? Do not make the loss smaller than it is. Do not make it larger than it is. The distinction between facts and fears will not solve the situation. It will prevent your imagination from adding unconfirmed damage to a real setback. That is enough progress for this stage. Eventually, the initial shock begins to fade. You can think more clearly. The event is no longer happening in real time, but its consequences may still be expanding. That brings you to containment. In this stage, the original setback may be over, but something is still making tomorrow harder than today. Money is leaving faster than you can replace it. Sleep is deteriorating. A commitment is consuming time you no longer have. A coping habit that provided temporary relief is creating a second problem. Maybe you're answering every opportunity because choosing one feels risky. Maybe you're staying awake until 2 a.m, trying to think your way out of the same problem. Maybe you're maintaining an appearance that your current resources can no longer support. The crisis ended, but the losses didn't. Containment can be difficult to recognize because it doesn't feel dramatic enough to deserve your full attention. You may believe the responsible move is to set bigger goals and work harder, but adding ambition to an active leak doesn't create recovery. It gives the leak more resources to consume. Ask yourself whether the setback is still generating new damage. Are panic-driven decisions creating additional obligations? Is one avoidable expense removing the breathing room you need? Is your attention divided among so many imagined emergencies that none of the real ones receives a clear decision? Are you trying to rebuild a career while a collapsing daily routine makes consistent work almost impossible? If so, the strategic objective isn't growth, it's containment. That can feel disappointing. You want visible progress. Containment often looks like reducing, postponing, renegotiating, protecting, or saying no. It may not produce a satisfying announcement. No one applauds because you finally addressed the expense that was quietly draining you. There is no victory speech for establishing a consistent bedtime or stepping away from an avoidable conflict. But this is where a comeback begins to become possible. Choose the one active source of loss, creating the greatest immediate pressure, not 20 problems. 1. Then identify the smallest responsible action that interrupts it. Cancel what can safely be canceled. Renegotiate what can responsibly be renegotiated. Place distance between yourself and an avoidable distraction. Ask for qualified help when the problem involves medical, legal, financial, or psychological risks you shouldn't handle alone. The goal is not to repair your entire life. It is to stop one part of it from becoming worse. When the loss slows, pressure changes. You can finally look beyond the immediate emergency. And that's when many people discovered that the map they've been using no longer matches the terrain. This is orientation. The panic has faded into something quieter, a persistent comparison between where you are and where you expected to be. You measure your current life against a plan created under different conditions. A different income, a different relationship, a different amount of energy, a different market, a different set of responsibilities, a different belief about who you were supposed to become. The old destination may still matter to you, but the route leading toward it may no longer exist. That realization can feel like a second loss. You may interpret adjustment as surrender. You may believe that changing direction means lowering your standards, disappointing people, or allowing the setback to define you. It doesn't. Acceptance is not approval. You don't have to pretend the loss was fair, necessary, or secretly beautiful. Some losses are none of those things. Acceptance means you stop making current decisions from expired information. Imagine following a map that marks a bridge across a river. The bridge existed when the map was drawn, but now it's gone. You can stand at the riverbank and insist that the map should still be correct. You can blame yourself for failing to cross where the road says you should. You can keep approaching the same point with greater determination. None of that rebuilds the bridge. At some point, strength means looking up from the old map. Orientation asks 3 questions. What is gone? What remains? What has changed? Under gone, write only what is genuinely unavailable now. Don't include everything you fear may disappear later. Under remains, list what the setback did not take. Skills, experience, relationships, tools, knowledge, responsibilities you still handle, habits that survived, a reputation with people who know your actual work, the ability to begin again with information you didn't possess the first time. Under changed, record the conditions that require a different approach. Maybe you have less time but better judgment, less money but fewer illusions, a smaller network but stronger relationships inside it, more responsibility, slower energy, or a clearer understanding of what you no longer want. This isn't an exercise in forced gratitude. You are not trying to make the loss look inspiring. You're determining which resources still exist and which assumptions can no longer be trusted. Clarity may feel cold before it feels hopeful. A comforting map can appear kinder than a truthful one, but only the truthful map gives your effort somewhere real to go. If you already recognize your position, leave the stage number in the comments. No explanation is necessary, just the number. Once you know where you stand, another problem appears. Clarity tells you where to move. It does not provide the energy, time, structure, or support required to get there. That is the work of reconstruction. This is the stage I warned you about at the beginning. It often looks exactly like a comeback. You're busy again. You're making plans. You may be telling people that things are finally turning around. Motivation has returned. And after a long period of feeling powerless, that energy feels like proof that the foundation is ready. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. You recognize reconstruction by its rhythm. A strong Monday followed by a missing Thursday. A new routine that survives 4 days and disappears after one difficult evening. Basic obligations are being met, but barely. Sleep moves later. Meals become an afterthought. Your schedule exists mostly in your head. One unexpected problem knocks the entire week off course. Then you interpret the collapse as evidence that you lack discipline. The real problem may be infrastructure. A plan can be intelligent and still fail because the daily life carrying it cannot support the weight. In military strategy, a force cannot operate indefinitely without the resources that sustain it. Applied to ordinary life, those supply lines are rarely dramatic. Sleep, food, baseline income, transportation, a workable schedule, a place to think, the ability to meet basic commitments, 1 or 2 relationships in which you don't have to perform strength every minute. These supports don't look like the comeback itself. That is why people neglect them. Motivation feels more important because you can feel it. Infrastructure is quiet. It performs its work in the background. But motivation changes like weather. A recovery that requires perfect emotional conditions will eventually meet a bad forecast. The objective of reconstruction is to create a minimum operating base capable of surviving an ordinary difficult day. Not your best day. Not the Monday morning when you feel rested and determined. Build for the bad Tuesday. The morning when you wake up discouraged. The afternoon when an application is rejected. The evening when an old memory returns and concentration becomes difficult. What must remain functional so one difficult day doesn't become another lost month? Choose 3 minimum supports. One may be a sleep window that gives you enough clarity to make reasonable decisions. Another may be a modest income source that protects essential obligations while you develop something better. A third may be one honest conversation each week with someone who helps you stay grounded. Your 3 may be completely different. The standard is not whether they look impressive. The standard is whether they continue to exist when your emotions are uncooperative. This is also where you need to be honest about busyness. Planning can become a shelter from uncertainty. Reorganizing the system can become a way of avoiding the first uncomfortable action. Research can look like progress long after it has stopped producing new understanding. Reconstruction is not endless preparation. Its purpose is to create enough support for responsible action. When the base begins to hold, your energy changes. You stop feeling as though every day is a sprint you're already losing. And then a new fear emerges. Not the fear of collapsing. The fear of trying again where other people can see you. This is re-entry. You have more stability now. You understand the terrain. You possess enough capacity to move. But when it's time to send the application, make the call, publish the work, deliver the project, or begin the difficult conversation, you hesitate. You research instead. You revise something that was already ready. You tell yourself you need one more course, one more plan, one more week, or one more sign that the timing is right. Preparation becomes attractive because it protects you from judgment. As long as the work remains private and unfinished, it cannot be rejected. The diagnostic signs are easy to miss. You consume information constantly, but rarely submit anything. Your goals stay broad. Get back on track. Rebuild my career. Become disciplined. Regain confidence. Broad goals feel meaningful, but they offer no visible finish line. Because they cannot be completed on a particular day, they also cannot provide evidence that you followed through. You may be waiting to feel confident before acting, but confidence often depends on evidence, and evidence usually arrives after action. That creates a trap. You wait for the feeling that can only be produced by doing the thing you're waiting to feel ready to do. Re-entry breaks that loop with one controllable battle. The outcome must matter, but it cannot depend entirely on another person's approval. Get hired is not fully under your control. Research and submit 3 qualified applications by Friday. Repair the relationship depends on 2 people. Prepare honestly and initiate the necessary conversation, includes behavior by control. Become confident has no finish line. Complete and deliver the presentation I've avoided does. Choose one objective that is concrete enough to measure, small enough to finish, and meaningful enough that completion tells you something about your reliability. The first win doesn't need to transform your life. It needs to be real. When you complete it, resist the urge to dismiss it, because the larger campaign remains unfinished. The purpose of that victory is not to prove that every problem has been solved. It proves that movement is possible again. You selected a target, committed resources, completed the action. That evidence changes the next decision. One completed move becomes 2. A kept promise makes the next promise more believable. Competence starts replacing speculation. Eventually, a different question emerges. Not, can I do this once? Can I become someone who continues? That question belongs to command. By now, you have evidence. Not a motivational statement. Not an imagined future identity. Evidence. You followed through on something. You recovered from a difficult day without allowing it to erase the entire week. You made a decision without the same panic controlling it. Command does not mean dominating other people. It does not mean becoming emotionally invulnerable, permanently confident, or immune to future setbacks. It means developing disciplined authority over your attention, commitments, and follow-through. It is the difference between hoping you will show up for yourself and possessing enough evidence to reasonably trust that you will. You can recognize this stage through several quiet changes. A bad day remains a bad day instead of becoming a verdict on your character. You can revise a plan without treating the revision as humiliation. You need less external validation before beginning. You don't announce every new direction before the work exists. The work itself begins to matter more than the performance of progress. You can also distinguish between urgency and importance. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every open door leads toward terrain worth occupying. The danger here is overconfidence. Early momentum can feel like permanent immunity. After months of protecting a few basic supports, you start succeeding and abandon the very structure that made success possible. Sleep becomes optional again. The schedule fills beyond capacity. Every opportunity looks like proof that you should expand. You mistake increased strength for unlimited strength. Progress can collapse under its own weight when expansion outruns support. If this is your stage, your next move may be protective rather than ambitious. Before adding another project, responsibility, or public commitment, identify what has actually been carrying you. Which routine is producing consistency? Which relationship is helping you remain honest? Which boundary protects your concentration? Which income source provides the breathing room required for better decisions? Which promise to yourself has become foundational? Protect those things before increasing the campaign's scale. Command is not expressed by doing everything. It is expressed by knowing what deserves your force and what does not. None of these stages will remain perfectly separate. You may return to containment after reaching command in another part of your life. A new financial pressure can require stabilization, even while your professional confidence remains strong. You may be rebuilding professionally while still orienting emotionally. You may have re-entered socially while remaining an impact after the end of an important relationship. Human recovery is not a board game in which you advance one space at a time and never return. Coming back to an earlier stage doesn't place you back at the beginning. You return with experience. You recognize the signs sooner. You know which questions to ask. You understand that protecting your position isn't cowardice, and adjusting the map isn't surrender. The terrain changed, so you change the strategy. That is not inconsistency. That is adaptation. Now return to the question in the title. Which stage are you in? Impact asks you to separate confirmed facts from fear. Containment asks you to interrupt one active source of loss. Orientation asks you to update the map. Reconstruction asks you to build support that survives difficult days. Re-entry asks you to complete one controllable and meaningful action. Command asks you to protect the systems that made reliable movement possible. You don't need to perform the work of all 6 stages today. You need to respect the objective of the one you're actually in. In the next 24 hours, write down 3 lines. The first is your stage, not the stage you wish you were in, not the stage you think would impress someone else, your actual position. The second is the objective of that stage. The third is one move that belongs there. If you are in impact, the move may be separating facts from predictions. If you were in containment, it may be interrupting one avoidable loss. If you're orienting, update one part of the map. If you're reconstructing, protect one supply line. If you're re-entering, define one finish line. If you're in command, protect the structure that earned your trust. 3 lines. 1 position. 1 move. Because you may not be behind. You may be measuring yourself against the demands of a stage you haven't reached yet. You may be demanding the confidence of command while still doing the necessary work of containment. You may be demanding action while your mind is still trying to understand the impact. You may be accusing yourself of inconsistency when your real problem is an unsupported base. The answer is not always greater force. Sometimes the answer is a more accurate position. If you're rebuilding and you want strategy without empty motivation, subscribe to the Comeback General. A setback can change the terrain. It does not get to decide your final position.